This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Investor Connect is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors and startups for fundraising. Please consider donating $100 to the program to help others in their investor and entrepreneur journey. You can find the donate button on the investorconnect.org website. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today I'm here with Patrick Michael Snyder, Executive Director at BizStarts. BizStarts brings entrepreneurs together from all backgrounds, ethnicities, and beliefs to create a collaborative learning environment that embodies positivity, inspires confidence, and develops people's capacity to achieve personal success and business growth. Patrick, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Hall.
Great. Can you give us a little bit more of your background before joining BizStarts?
Sure. I hope you don't mind me going a little further back than most people usually do. I come from an entrepreneurial family. My mom actually came over from Italy when she was 14 years old. My grandfather had a hotel in Italy, and it was literally during the Second World War, and he had Jewish people in his basement. So he thought he better get the girls out of town. And when my mom got here, she couldn't speak the language. As a young kid, I would follow her around. People would make fun of her accent. And she had one skill, and that was doing hair. And like most entrepreneurs, she was also trying to get a job just so she could get some money to get the thing going. And people in 1974 were offering her $265 an hour to sweep the floor of a beauty shop. So the great story about my mom is the thing that she saw she was solving, the problem that she was solving, was there were a lot of slip and falls in assisted living facilities when people would go to get their hair done. So through the Catholic Church, she started placing beauty salons in assisted living facility homes. And short story long, in 1974, instead of making $265 an hour, she was making $8,000 to $1,000 a day, which translates to this year's money of literally $1 million a year business. She told me not to go to college and that I should just not waste the money and start a business. But I did end up going. And when I got out, one thing is we were in a wealthy neighborhood in Chicago's North Shore. And at that time, desktop publishing was taking off. And there was a person named Asher Birnbaum who had a really great publication called North Shore Magazine. And that zip code on the North Shore is literally third behind Beverly Hills in terms of income. And I just thought, he's got this huge building, literally 100,000 square feet. He has typesetters, he has printing presses, he has all this overhead, 15 salespeople. Why wouldn't I be able to just do this in my basement with a computer? I didn't charge much less money, but I did charge less. But like my mom, I was customer funded. So I had the idea of a magazine. I didn't know how to desktop publish. So I literally went into a Kinko's and asked somebody if he would like to be my partner. I gave him 20% of the business. And Tom Miller and I went out and sold all the ads, pre-sold literally the first 3 issues. And we didn't buy a printing press. We didn't buy a lot of elaborate office space. We just sold ads and then eventually had a magazine. 3 years later, we literally sold it to the Chicago Sun-Times and gave them our 20 employees. So it's a good story. I started, because I had so many travel and entertainment advertisers, because it's a T&E magazine, the governor of Illinois gave me the job as the director of tourism for the state of Illinois through the contacts. And at that time, I started teaching. So the teaching was basically hospitality, but then at Roosevelt, I became their entrepreneur in residence. And just a segue into my next job, I ran a group called USASB. And USASB is the United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And we were the largest organization in the world for faculty that teach entrepreneurship. So basically, I was serving on the BizStarts board of directors at that time. And BizStarts was founded by a gentleman named Dan Steininger. He's the grandson of Dan Hone, who the Hone Bridge is named after in Milwaukee. And he was able to cherry pick a lot of great board members, like, John Olin, who is the CFO of Harley, is on our board. Laura Goff from Baird was on our board. We had people from Milwaukee Tool. So you can imagine it was a powerful organization. But when they started 12 years ago, the problem they were solving was they were trying to keep young talent, meaning the brain power in Milwaukee, kids from Marquette or ones that went to UW-Madison, and have them support entrepreneurship. This starts supporting that kind of scalable entrepreneurship. As a board member 8 years later, I said, this is no longer a problem. We have 6 incubators. The colleges have all their own entrepreneur centers. Why don't we try to support businesses like my mom's? So businesses coming from underserved areas. And the board said, if you want to take a $40,000 pay cut and come run a city organization after running an international group, we'll let you do it. So we started with that with BizStarts 2 years ago. My mind at that time was like, how do we get a system of learning for people who don't have any resources? Or how do we get businesses marketing when they don't have any money, or hiring employees when they can't pay them? And luckily, I had some horsepower from the United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And I started asking our 800 professors, is there somebody out there doing it? And there was a gentleman named Professor Michael Morris, and Michael had done 142 scholarly articles. He was an entrepreneur in residence, meaning he had an exit and now is a professor at University of Notre Dame. He started 300 companies in South Africa, several hundred in Haiti, and then went to University of Florida, Syracuse University, Oklahoma State University, and made them all top 10 programs while doing this underserved community entrepreneurship group. So we borrowed Michael's program with his blessing. And I should tell you that if there were a Nobel Prize given for entrepreneurship in underserved communities, Michael would be on a plane to Stockholm tonight. So unlike, and I'll go just a little further, unlike most incubators that do 6 weeks of a boot camp and end in a pitch competition, what Michael's program does is that's when the program just starts. Now they've learned about entrepreneurship, and how does it become a system of doing? So what ends up happening is after the 6 weeks, we pair them with student consultants. In our case, they're Marquette honors students. That we get 25 steps to being in business, and those students work with them on doing the 25 steps, anything from building a website to getting their LLC to getting, emailable flyers. And the great thing about it is all those steps would typically would spend a small business out of money. Well, with the student consultants doing it free of charge and us offering mentors from the community, everything they do to get through those 25 steps is free of charge. So their business is up and running within 6 months.
Great. Well, it sounds like you're a big fan of the early stage startup where you have to basically, bootstrap your way up. And so, how do you see that industry evolving? How do you see self-employment moving forward from here?
Well, I think that, a couple things that are going on right now is that if you email or just go to GPPE Notre Dame or you Google that, you'll notice that Michael has these programs now in 11 different cities. And he's also starting a sort of a worldwide expansion. And the idea is that you need to teach customer finance, and you need to teach it to people that are not traditional entrepreneurs like I was, who might have a parent that was in business and then decided to take the leap, or went to college and went through a great program like Babson or what they have at USC or Purdue or Notre Dame. That you not need to find people that don't necessarily have money and teach them how to run and scale a business. And is it okay if I give you an example?
Sure.
Sure. So we had one person whose idea was to, start a bike shop because they knew how to, basically work on bicycles really well. And we did an intake interview, and they had gone through the classes, and it turned out that his wife worked for Abbott, which is a big company in Waukegan, Illinois. And there's also another big company called Solo Cup that's right there. Basically the campuses are not more than 3 miles apart. Well, what the advice was working with his wife was that, the problem that we would solve is that on these campuses, people can either use Zoom, pick up the phone, or they can walk 3 blocks to have an in-person meeting and have to walk back. So and it's not the best situation when you're sitting on the same campus, but you can't meet face to face with a person. So what we did was pitched HR that this was a human resources benefit. We put 50 bikes on their lot. He sold 50 service contracts. And I don't know if you know much about bike shops, but they don't sell many bikes per week, So what he did was he sold what it would take of almost a half year to sell in one day. He got the contracts, and he, also worked with an insurance company to make sure there was no liability. And then the person ended up getting more and more clever. So mid-year, when it was winter, he was like, I feel horrible. Like, I've left you guys on the leash, Now your folks can't, exercise anymore. So then he also was selling these stationary bikes so the people could work out and get the contracts. But he also got Solo. And now he's up to, I believe it's 600 bikes, which is he could sell right now. Like, that's the saleable company. We had a woman start with 1 scooter, driving back and forth from her resort because she couldn't afford a car. And she printed up some simple flyers. She got a commercial liability policy on her 1 scooter. Well, while she was working for $14 an hour at the resort, her 1 scooter was making $50 an hour. Well, she just kept buying scooters. She kept on reinvesting and growing that fleet. She ended up with 12 scooters on that property. So you're looking at $600 in revenue with very, very little cost. She gives the bellman who pushes the scooter rental a lunch or brings them a treat or whatever for each one. And, this $600 an hour, if she can scale to different resorts, you're talking about a whole lot of money if you're looking at those numbers. So that's 2 examples, but we literally have 30 of them that have come out of the first 2 years of this program. All customer funded, no loans, no credit cards, just, being resourceful and using what God gave them and moving that forward.
So there's a lot of companies in the self-employment space. I don't know how many there are today, but I know there's many as well. Perhaps you have more information there. But can you explain how entrepreneurs are using customer funding to launch their business, I guess in the absence of loans or angel funding?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways that you can. There's probably 100 ways you can do it, but I know of 3 that work really well. One is pre-selling orders. So basically, you put up a product concept, and believe it or not, real estate companies do it all the time. They put a picture of what the condos would look like on the lake, and then they pre-sell those units until they have enough to build the building. And in our case, in my case, it was walking around with a magazine cover and selling the advertising. In the case of the bike person, he didn't have the money to buy all those bikes, so he charged a deposit to the big company. And when they paid that, then he was able to provide them with inventory. So that's one way. Another way is to barter and then leverage your barter based on future opportunity. So I'll give you an example. When I started the magazine, I wanted the very first issue to really bring in a lot of cash. So I decided to do a golf resort section that was on the state of Wisconsin. And basically what I did was I knew that there was one resort because all those people on the North Shore golf. I mean, and Wisconsin's their favorite destination because it's drivable. It's a couple hours away. And the course is, because of the topography, Illinois is very flat, Wisconsin is very hilly. you just have beautiful golf courses. So I understood that in Kohler, Wisconsin, they had a place called the American Club. And I went up to Kohler and I said, look, I want you to have the back page ad of this golf section, and I'm not even going to charge you for it. All I'm going to ask you is that you put me up for the next 2 weeks in one of your 5-star rooms, which was nice for someone who was 27 years old, because I'd never stayed at a 5-star resort before. But then what I did was I leveraged that. Every customer that I went to, I mentioned, we've got this golf guide. Here's our demographics. We're all along the North Shore. But one thing I can tell you is the back page is already bought by the American Club. So these golf resort owners or these corporate owners of golf courses said, if they got the American Club, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we have to be in there too. So there are strategic relations you can make with bigger and more reputable companies to bring you reputation, and then you can use that strategy to pre-sell orders or to bootstrap your business. So those are some of the strategies.
Great. And so what are the challenges in doing this customer funding?
Well, one is that there are confidence issues with the founders. So they don't believe enough in their product to go to a large company and ask for a big order. The second thing is that a lot of people with great ideas do a lot of talking, but they don't do a lot of listening. So when they go into a sales call or a development situation, they can't wait to talk about their product, but they have no idea whether or not the person wants the product. So rather than interviewing a customer and asking questions like, because I always have one feeling, if you're sitting, and it might take you 100 calls to get that appointment, but if you're sitting in the room with a big client, somebody that can spend a lot of money and potentially fund your business, they wouldn't have you there unless there was a potential to do that business. So what you need to do is ask, like, how is the last vendor not as so good for you? Why are you potentially considering this relationship? What are the top 3 things that you would do differently or advice you would give to me as a company to best fulfill working with, say, Procter & Gamble? More questions than that. And then afterwards, you start to get the feeling of, and this is one of the things we teach in the program, is, okay, this company has this overall objective in working with me. The strategies are the top 3 things that they would do differently or what they would do to add to your process to make you better. So you just kind of spit those out as strategies, and then you create tactics that cover those strategies and put it on a timeline, and you put together a nice proposal based on all the information and data that you got from them. And I'd say the number one barrier to success with companies that are trying to scale coming from these underserved areas, or maybe even just a traditional mom and pop, is they have no idea what the market is looking for, and they don't know how to sell it.
Those great.
Are the challenges.
So you run BizStarts. How does that fit into this overall landscape of working with startups?
So what we do is we do these, we do cohorts in May and September. We invite people to apply for a scholarship to attend the program, and writing for the scholarship is very rigorous. So the application process is a little bit of a grind, and we give everybody who applies and is accepted the program free of charge. So after the people go through that cohort, and we've had 3 since 2019, in person, mass, socially distant, just to make sure that our government partners that fund us a little bit will, not defund us. And then we immediately upon graduation, we start tracking them, making sure they're getting to those 25 steps that are to being in business. And I can send those to you so you can post them to people that might be listening, because maybe they don't need a student consultant. Maybe they can Google each of the items and do them on their own. Or maybe somebody out there listening wants to start one of these programs in their city because they want to give back to the community, or they want to invest in one of these companies, have a vehicle to invest in these companies so they can make money. We don't allow investment in ours because we like the customer funded. And now we're looking for ways like AARP gives some seed money to the companies in Illinois or in Wisconsin now that are getting started. But basically, what we try to do is monthly sessions after the boot camp, keep them engaged with their student consultant, make sure that they're aligned with mentors, and you want top-notch mentors. So I'll give you an example. We have some food businesses like food trucks and things like that, as you can imagine. Well, Giacomo Falcone from the CEO, and he's the chairman of the board, and literally the birthright of that Palermo's Pizza, which is home run in pizza, which is a lot of big brand name pizzas that you see on frozen shelves. He's their mentor. So basically, the original boot camp, hook up with a student consultant, connections to the mentors, connections to money, and then we track what they're doing. And out of the 75 businesses we started with, because there were 25 in each cohort, we're proud to say we have 30 companies now that are up and running and cash flow positive.
Well, that's great. And so what's the next step for your program from here?
So the next step, there are several next steps. One is that basically we've been, there's a traditional Black community that's an underserved area. That's where we piloted the program over the last over the last 2 years. So now we're moving into the Hispanic community because they've reached out to us and said, why don't you teach this thing in Spanish and see if we can't get some businesses going. And then I'll tell you a funny story how, sometimes the universe makes people go together. Is I was sitting at a bar watching a game, and I noticed a deaf person, and I don't know if that's even politically correct, but forgive me, I'm another generation. But I texted like, "How's it going?" on my phone and showed it to him because I didn't want him to feel like he was left out at the bar as we were watching the football game. And we started going back and forth, and it turned out he was the professor of communications for a deaf university. And I told him I ran a charity, and he said, "What are you doing for deaf people?" And the lights just went off. Like, if we can help Black and brown communities, why wouldn't we be able to help deaf people that are deaf or hard of hearing start their own ventures? So what's next is expansion.
It sounds like a great place to expand. There's many needs out there in many ways. In the last minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I guess what I would say is that, if you're thinking about starting one of these smaller businesses, anybody that has a company can have a big company, a big company as a client. I had 2 students at Roosevelt University when I was a professor of practice in Kendall College it was actually Kendall that I was at that time. Kendall College is a culinary school. So, they've had Iron Chef Garso was one of their students there. They turn out really great chefs. Well, we had 2 students that basically they did breakfast, but they really couldn't get to the lunch and the dinner part. They could create gourmet breakfast, and as you know, in that market, they've got 3 hours to sell and then they have to close. So it's a limited capacity in terms of revenue capture. And what I recommended is, as an employee benefit, why not go into a Fortune 5 company and do breakfast once a month, and it's instead of getting, 15, 20 tops a day, hopefully you can capture 300 or 2,000. That business, which was literally 10 years ago, now has 40 of the Fortune 500 companies as customers. And their original idea of starting in a physical space, which would have cost them money, 100% customer funded, and the room for growth was so much more explosive. They did so much better than they ever would have done as a restaurant group. And now they've got employees, and so I would say, if you're thinking about starting a small venture, think about how you can get big in a hurry, and think about how you can use one corporate customer to fund your entire business.
Great. So how best for listeners to get back in touch with you for those 25 points and information about your program?
Sure. The best way is email So P Snyder at BizStarts.com, which I think you have up already, but if you don't, it's P as in Patrick, SNYDER at BizStarts.com. And I love talking to everyone about this program because there are a lot of people out there with ability but don't have the opportunity. And I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Great. We'll include that in the show notes. Want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Paul, this was absolutely great. And thanks for all the good you're doing in the community, and Happy New Year.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.